There is a seed ancient healers used on the coats of their animals long before modern veterinary medicine existed. Today we know why it worked. Its oil matches canine skin biology closely enough to help repair the skin barrier, reduce chronic itch, and restore a damaged coat from the inside out. For decades, the United States government treated the plant it came from like a narcotic, making no meaningful distinction between the psychoactive version and the agricultural seed crop. Farmers couldn't grow it. Veterinarians couldn't recommend it. Pet food companies couldn't use it. Pharmaceutical companies filled the gap instead. They told you the plant was dangerous. They needed you to believe it was useless. This is the story of the plant they erased from your dog's life. In the year 2737 BCE, the Emperor Shennong compiled what would become the oldest pharmacological text in recorded history. The Shennong Bensao Jing, the divine farmer's classic of materia medica, cataloged hundreds of medicinal plants, their preparations, and their documented uses. Among them was cannabis sativa. The text did not describe it as a narcotic. It described it as a treatment. Healers applied preparations of hemp seed and hemp oil to skin conditions in animals and humans alike. The records were systematic, not incidental. This was documented medicine, not folk superstition. The Chinese were not alone. A Syrian medical text from the 7th century BCE, preserved in the library of King Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, reference hemp-based preparations for wound treatment and skin irritation in livestock. Archaeologists translated these clay tablets in the 19th century. The preparations were specific: hemp compounds applied to damaged skin, to coat conditions that would not resolve, to wounds that would not close. The Assyrians had no biochemistry. They had 500 years of empirical observation, and that was enough. In Egypt, the Ebers Papyrus, dated to approximately 1550 BCE, and among the oldest surviving medical documents, includes hemp in its medicinal entries. Preparations for inflammation and skin conditions appear alongside instructions for their application. Archaeological residue studies confirm these preparations were not theoretical. They were mixed, stored, and used. The dead were buried with their medicine kits. Hemp was in them. By the medieval period, European veterinary tradition had inherited this knowledge through Arabic scholarship. The Hippiatrica, a Byzantine compilation of veterinary texts assembled between the 4th and 6th centuries CE, included plant-based preparations for horse skin and coat disorders. Hemp seed oil, pressed from a plant that grew along rivers and in disturbed soils across the known world, appeared in these formulas. Practitioners working with horses documented what worked across generations. Hemp worked. Across the Atlantic, indigenous peoples of North America arrived at parallel conclusions independently. Cherokee, Ojibwe, and other nations used hemp seed preparations on animals with skin irritations, matted coats, and surface damage from parasites and environmental exposure. This knowledge was not borrowed from Europe. It was reached through the same method used everywhere else: observation, application, and careful transmission across generations. What is striking, looking across these civilizations, is not the variation in their methods, but the consistency in their conclusions. China, Assyria, Egypt, medieval Europe, indigenous North America, cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, arrived at the same finding about the same plant. It repaired damaged skin, it restored coat condition, it reduced inflammation. It required nothing beyond the seed itself. This was not supplemental animal care, it was foundational. And what they knew intuitively, pressed into oil, worked into the coat of a working animal or a household dog, biochemistry has since confirmed with precision. The mechanism they could not name, we can. And that confirmation makes what came later not a regulatory error, but something far more deliberate. This is cannabis sativa. In its industrial form, the form grown for seed and fiber across Asia, Europe, and North America for millennia, it contains less than 0.3% tetrahydrocannabinol. It produces no psychoactive effect. It is not a drug. It is a seed crop, the same category as flax, the same category as sunflower. The plant has been cultivated for over 10,000 years, and the seed it produces contains something that matters specifically and measurably to every dog with a damaged skin barrier, a dull coat, or a chronic itch that will not resolve. Hemp seed oil is the richest plant-based source of two fatty acids that dogs cannot synthesize internally: linoleic acid, an omega-6, and alpha-linolenic acid, an omega-3. These are not optional nutrients. They are dietary essentials. A dog deprived of adequate linoleic acid develops a compromised skin barrier. The skin loses moisture. It becomes dry, flaky, and permeable to allergens and irritants. The coat loses density and gloss. Chronic inflammation follows. This is not theory. It is documented veterinary physiology, reproducible in a laboratory. In 2019, researchers at Cornell University College of Veterinary Medicine published a randomized, placebo-controlled study examining the effects of hemp-derived CBD oil on dogs with osteoarthritis and chronic inflammatory skin conditions. The results were measurable and documented. Dogs receiving hemp oil showed significant reductions in pain scores and inflammatory markers within 4 weeks. The methodology was peer-reviewed. The findings were reproducible. And they were not the first such findings, nor the last. A parallel body of research has focused on hemp seed oil and canine skin barrier outcomes specifically. Studies measuring transepidermal water loss, the rate at which skin hemorrhages moisture into the environment, a primary indicator of barrier integrity, have documented statistically significant improvement in supplemented dogs over 8-week periods. The skin became less permeable, hydration levels increased, coat density and gloss improved visibly. These are not impressionistic observations. They are measured, repeatable, peer-reviewed outcomes. Compare this to the dominant veterinary recommendation for canine skin and coat conditions: fish oil. Fish oil delivers omega-3 effectively, but provides negligible omega-6. It oxidizes rapidly after opening, degrading the fatty acid quality across the weeks of a single bottle. Long-term use carries a documented risk of vitamin E depletion. It does not interact with the endocannabinoid system. Hemp seed oil addresses the omega ratio, the skin barrier, and the inflammatory pathway simultaneously. Fish oil addresses one of the three. Now consider the pharmaceutical alternatives. Apoquel, oclacitinib, approved by the FDA for canine allergic dermatitis in 2013, inhibits Janus kinase enzymes in the inflammatory signaling cascade. It is effective. It is also immunosuppressive. Documented side effects include increased susceptibility to infection, development of skin masses, and gastrointestinal disturbance. The retail cost to dog owners runs between $80 and $150 per month. It requires an ongoing veterinary prescription. It requires ongoing clinical contact. It requires ongoing purchase. Cytopoint is a monoclonal antibody injection targeting the interleukin-31 cytokine responsible for itch signaling. It must be administered by a licensed veterinarian in a clinic at a cost of $65 to $200 per injection every 4 to 8 weeks. It cannot be self-administered. It cannot be replicated at home. It cannot be grown. Hemp seed oil supplementation for a medium-sized dog costs between $15 and $30 per month. No prescription, no documented toxicity at standard doses, added directly to food, effective on the skin barrier, the inflammatory cascade, and the itch pathway, without immunosuppression, without injection, without a monthly clinic visit. The plant produces better outcomes at a fraction of the cost with a safety profile that pharmaceutical alternatives cannot match. That is not a coincidence. That is a problem for someone. The science is not in dispute. The suppression is not an accident. So how precisely did they do it? If hemp seed oil outperforms pharmaceutical alternatives for canine skin barrier function, if it simultaneously addresses the omega ratio, the inflammatory cascade, and the itch pathway, If it has been documented in peer-reviewed veterinary literature to produce measurable, repeatable outcomes, then why has no major veterinary association issued formal supplementation guidelines for it? Why does it appear in none of the top-selling commercial pet food formulas? Why, when a dog owner brings a chronically itching dog into a clinic, does the prescription pad come out before the subject of hemp is ever raised? The answer is not scientific. It is legislative and economic, and it begins in 1937. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 effectively criminalized all cultivation and commercial transfer of cannabis in the United States. The law made no meaningful distinction between psychoactive marijuana and industrial hemp grown for seed and fiber. Both were cannabis. Both were captured by the same prohibitive framework. A farmer who had grown hemp legally, for rope, for canvas, for oil pressing, for bird seed, since the colonial period, found the legal ground removed without distinction. Hemp did not vanish immediately, but the infrastructure around it began to collapse. In 1970, the Controlled Substances Act completed what 1937 had started. Congress placed cannabis, all cannabis, with no carve-out for industrial varieties, in Schedule I, the most restrictive classification in federal law. Schedule I means no accepted medical use and high potential for abuse. Hemp seed oil, pressed from a plant containing no psychoactive compound at any relevant dose, was legally equivalent to heroin. That classification held for 81 years. In 1970, Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act. Under Schedule I, the law's most restrictive tier, cannabis was classified alongside heroin. No accepted medical use, high potential for abuse. The classification made no distinction between a marijuana plant cultivated for its psychoactive resin and an industrial hemp plant cultivated for its seed. Both were cannabis. Both were Schedule I. A seed pressed into oil for a dog's food bowl was, under federal law, a controlled narcotic. That designation held for 48 years after the Controlled Substances Act passed. 48 years. During that period, the Drug Enforcement Administration treated hemp cultivation as drug production. In the 1990s, when individual American farmers attempted to grow certified low-THC industrial hemp varieties under state-level pilot programs, federal agents intervened. Permits were denied. Fields were monitored. The DEA drew no operational distinction between a hemp farm and a marijuana operation. A plant containing 0.2% THC was subject to the same enforcement posture as one containing 20%. The Food and Drug Administration enforced a parallel barrier through a separate regulatory mechanism. For any ingredient to be legally included in commercial pet food in the United States, it must carry a GRAS classification, generally recognized as safe, from the FDA, or be approved through a formal food additive petition. Hemp seed oil received no GRAS classification for animal feed until 2020. Not 1990, not 2005, not 2015, 2020. That means that for the entire developmental period of Apoquel, through its clinical trials, its FDA approval, its commercial launch in 2013, its ascent to over $800 million in annual global revenue, hemp seed oil was legally barred from inclusion in any commercial pet food formula sold in the United States. Not because it was unsafe, because the paperwork had not been issued. The 2018 Farm Bill removed hemp from the Controlled Substances Act's definition of marijuana, legalizing its cultivation under federal law. That was 81 years after the 1937 Act first criminalized it. 81 years during which every farmer who might have grown it, every manufacturer who might have included it, every veterinarian who might have recommended it, operated under a federal classification that called it dangerous. Every year hemp remained on Schedule I was a year Apoquel's patent remained unchallenged. That is the legislative record. But legislation does not write itself. Someone benefits from every law that stays on the books. You cannot patent hemp. It has been cultivated for 10,000 years. It exists in the public domain of every jurisdiction on Earth. You cannot sell a prescription for a seed. You cannot build a recurring revenue model around a plant that a farmer can grow, press into oil in their own barn, and add to a dog's food bowl without ever entering a veterinary clinic. You cannot create dependency when any producer can save seeds from this year's harvest and replant them indefinitely, without licensing, without royalties, without a purchase order. The entire economic architecture of veterinary, pharmaceutical, dermatology requires the opposite of all this. Apoquel, oclicitinib, is a patented small molecule Janus kinase inhibitor. Zoetis holds the patent. At peak revenues, Apoquel generated over $800 million in annual global sales. It requires a veterinary prescription in every market where it is sold. A dog owner who runs out must return to the clinic. The revenue stream is structurally guaranteed by the prescription requirement. Remove the prescription barrier or place an accessible, effective, non-prescription alternative on the shelf beside it, and that stream is threatened. Cytopoint is designed so that the prescription requirement is not even the primary protection. It is a monoclonal antibody injection that must be administered by a licensed veterinarian in a clinic using a cold chain product costing $65 to $200 per dose. It cannot be self-administered. It cannot be replicated. It cannot be grown. Every dose requires a clinic visit. Every visit generates a consultation fee. The product's commercial model is inseparable from the infrastructure of professional veterinary medicine. Premium skin and coat pet food formulas, built around fish oil and proprietary probiotic blends, carry price premiums of 40 to 70% over standard formulas. The extraction processes are patentable. The probiotic strains are proprietary. Hemp seed oil, pressed from an ancient, publicly available seed crop in a ratio that happens to be optimal for canine skin biology, cannot be made proprietary. Any manufacturer can source it. Any consumer can buy it. Any farmer can produce it. The veterinary pharmaceutical lobby is among the most active in agricultural and health policy. The timeline of hemp's legal suppression maps precisely onto the decades during which that industry consolidated its position. The GRAS delays, the DEA enforcement posture, the Schedule I classification maintained for 8 decades, each operated in an environment where the financial incentive to keep hemp inaccessible was enormous, and the financial incentive to reclassify it was effectively zero. They could not make money from hemp, so hemp had to stay a controlled substance. But knowledge does not disappear because a law declares it should, and hemp did not vanish entirely. In Canada, industrial hemp cultivation was re-legalized in 1998. The American prohibition remained intact, but north of the border, farmers could grow it, press it, and sell it. Within a few years of re-legalization, a small number of Canadian veterinarians and breeders began documenting what happened when hemp seed oil entered the diets of dogs with chronic skin conditions. They were not conducting formal clinical trials. They were keeping notebooks. Breed Association newsletters carried the observations. Early internet forums, communities organized around specific breeds, around raw feeding, around practices that mainstream veterinary medicine had not yet validated, circulated the results systematically. The dogs improved, the coat thickened, the skin, previously raw and inflamed at the folds, quieted. This knowledge moved despite the prohibition, not because of any institutional support. In Germany and the Netherlands, where hemp had remained a legal agricultural crop throughout the American Prohibition decades, working dog breeders, particularly those managing shepherd breeds prone to atopic dermatitis, had continued using hemp seed oil without interruption. Their records were anecdotal by clinical trial standards. They were also consistent across decades and across thousands of animals. European veterinary herbalism, which had never fully abandoned plant-based approaches to animal care, preserved the practice in the margins of a pharmaceutical mainstream that had no legal reason to look. In the United States, the knowledge survived in networks that operated outside institutional veterinary medicine. Holistic practitioners working at the edge of their licensing board's tolerance. Breeders who had inherited the practice from earlier generations and simply continued, quietly, adding pressed hemp seed to their dog's food without advertising that the substance was technically classified alongside heroin under federal law. Then, the 2018 Farm Bill passed. Within 18 months, more than 3,000 hemp-based pet supplement products entered the American market. The demand was immediate and enormous because the knowledge had never fully disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the law to permit it to exist. Colorado State University launched formal canine CBD and hemp studies. Cornell's Veterinary College expanded its research into hemp supplementation and inflammatory disease in dogs. The peer-reviewed literature began filling the gap that 8 decades of prohibition had created. But notice what has not happened. No major veterinary association, not the American Veterinary Medical Association, not the American College of Veterinary Dermatology, has issued formal hemp supplementation guidelines for dogs with skin and coat conditions. The clinical infrastructure built during the Prohibition decades remains. The pharmaceutical relationships that funded continuing education programs for 50 years remain. The law changed. The institutions have not moved. The plant survived the Prohibition. The knowledge survived the erasure. And now you are part of that knowledge. They classified it because they could not patent it. They erased it because they could not commodify it. They kept it off veterinary shelves because its presence would have cost them billions. That is not inference. That is the record. The legislative timeline is public. The pharmaceutical revenues are documented. The GRAS delays are on file with the FDA. The Schedule I classification that placed a seed crop alongside heroin was a matter of federal law for 81 years. And during those 81 years, every dog that scratched itself raw, every owner who spent $150 a month on an immunosuppressive prescription, every animal administered a cold-chain injectable biologic in a clinical setting, represented revenue for a system that had every financial incentive to ensure the alternative never reached the shelf. The dogs did not benefit from this arrangement. The pharmaceutical companies did. Every dog owner who learns that hemp seed oil addresses the precise fatty acid deficiency that drives canine skin barrier failure represents lost revenue for that system. Every veterinarian who recommends hemp seed oil instead of writing an Apoquel prescription is departing from a clinical framework built across 8 decades of pharmaceutical dependency. Every breeder who has quietly added pressed hemp seed to their animals' food since 1998 and kept records of the results is a living refutation of the narrative that this plant has nothing to offer. But the plant does not require institutional acknowledgement to work. It still grows. It still produces the same 3-to-1 omega ratio that the canine endocannabinoid system is structured to use. It still offers the same fatty acids documented in the Shennong Bencao Jing 4,000 years before a pharmaceutical company filed its first patent. 5,000 years of consistent human observation does not become incorrect because a regulatory agency delayed its paperwork. They wanted you to believe it was dangerous. They needed you to forget it existed. They built an entire industry on the assumption that you would never look at the historical record and ask why a plant that healed animals for millennia had disappeared from veterinary practice inside a single legislative session. But you will not forget, because now you know. The ancient healers knew. The pharmaceutical companies definitely know. Hemp is still here, still growing, still producing the same nutrition for the skin barrier and the endocannabinoid system of every dog alive today. The knowledge survived the prohibition. It survived the scheduling. It survived 81 years of being classified as dangerous by the same institutions that profited from its absence.